Ladies and gentlemen, today I have the pleasure to welcome Mr. Yves Francois. Mr. Yves Francois is a musician based here in Chicago, and he's recently released a CD named Viva Rakambu. Mr. Francois, thank you for sharing.
You're welcome.
Thank you for joining me under the Human Rights Tree.
You're welcome.
Before we start diving into your music, and I would like to know who is Mr. Yves Francois.
Very nice to ask that question. My name is Yves Francois. I was born in 1960 in Chicago, Illinois, the city I live in now. My parents were both immigrants. My mother is French, Italian, North African. She grew up in Tunisia. Indeed, my older sister was born in Tunis. Okay. My younger brother is Mark Smirchek. He plays clarinet, saxophone, and keyboards with the ensemble, and is also a TESOL teacher and an administrator.
I see. Growing up in Chicago, what kind of music were you exposed to when you were growing up?
When I was growing up, unlike a lot of other people who like the contemporary pop and rock music of the day, I preferred the music. My first love was jazz music and big bands, particularly the 1930s and 40s, which my father liked very much. He was a clarinet player himself. He also played a little bit of other instruments, keyboards, and even a little bit of trumpet. He gave me 1 or 2 lessons before he saw that I was going to progress quickly.
I see.
But then by the time I was 10, 12 years old, I developed a taste for early jazz, rumba, and African music, as well as the music of the swing era. So when I started playing trumpet, I wanted to blend all those musics together all my life. It took years to gather the proficiency to play music the way I wanted to. My first albums were straight blues jazz. They got issued eventually as Blues for Hawk on Delmark Records. But by 2001, 2002, I started working with Rakambu Jazz, which is the idea of mixing African music, mixing with the North African music, Caribbean, even a little bit of South American music with the jazz of the pre-bebop era. So like the jazz of the 20s, 30s, and 40s from New Orleans and Harlem in particular, and the South Side of Chicago.
Based on you listening to what you said, I know your father did have an influence because he was a musician. Yes. I didn't have the chance to meet your father, but I did have the chance to meet your mother, and she was a fascinating person. Can you tell me a little bit about her?
Mon mère was the most beautiful person. I remember early when I told her I wanted to play jazz, and she said to me that the music she heard the first time she heard music like jazz was in Babzwika in Tunis, which is the old quarter. And she said Africans started with the rhythms of jazz and rumba. And if you hear the musics from Senegal, which she was in love with, she spent time there, and Tunisia and Algeria, you hear those rhythms in Morocco. So I was exposed to this kind of music from a very early age and yearned for a union of all these musics, because to me, we are all people, all music is legitimate, all life is legitimate, and we should share together, not create walls.
If I'm not mistaken, she was a dancer as well.
She was a ballerina in classical music. She was, I believe she was the touring company for the Ballet de Paris. I wish Mark was here, he would correct me on it, but I believe she was the touring. So she would tour southern France, España, Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, Senegal, and even Vietnam.
Okay. So you grow up being exposed to different cultures, to different music. When did you
Yes.
decide you want to be a musician?
When Louis Armstrong died, I was 10 years old. It was in 1971. It had a profound effect on me. I wanted to be a trumpet player even before then. The trumpet players in Duke Ellington's orchestra with the mutes, I loved. But Louis Armstrong's presence and going to Africa, which he went several times, I saw a video of him playing with some musicians from Ghana and Nigeria. And I was like, that's the source, that's the root of our music. And I wanted to be a trumpet player and give something of that energy to the universe.
Can you describe a little bit on the process of learning how to play trumpet? Because I feel like this is the instrument you chose and you come to love. And how was it? How was the process of choosing that instrument? I believe that Louis Armstrong have a lot of effect on that. But how was the process of choosing that instrument and learning to master it?
For me, when I was very young, that was my favorite sound, was the sound of the trumpet. So when I got the instrument, I was actually fairly old. I was about 12 years old, maybe even 13. All I did for the next 5 years when I had free time was to practice.
How did
So
you get the instrument?
my father bought me an instrument.
Okay.
And he first rented a cornet for me for about 6 months. By the end of that year, I had a Bach Stradivarius trumpet, the one I still play today. And he was very happy with the amount of work me and my brother put into our instruments. So we practiced a lot. We did scales. Mark and I actually did scales together and technical etudes. But we always wanted to play jazz, and we always wanted to play, different kinds of music, so rumbas and all that.
So were you self-taught, or you have somebody to
I had a couple
teach you?
teachers.
Okay.
One, his name is John Gorman. I'll never forget him. He was very instrumental in my high school and just post high school years to get me more technically proficient on the trumpet. Good friend of mine, plays beautiful classical trumpet, and he also plays good jazz and lead trumpet. On my first album, Blues for Hawk, he plays a lot of the lead trumpet parts.
So
the other one was a guy named Stan Warren. He was my saxophone. He was a saxophone player who was also the band director in high school, and he gave me some guidance as well. Later in life, I was also guided by my mentors, Franz Jackson in particular, who was a great saxophone player from the swing era. And when I heard him, I'm like, I got to make a record with him. We worked together, and he taught me how to hear music as opposed to reading the music. He told me, he says, don't read when you play a song, because if you're reading it, it's dead. When you're talking about jazz or this kind of music, rumba or anything, I played gigs with Franz, there was never music on the stand. You had to know the song. If you didn't know it, you learned it very quickly, one course.
So you learn how to play trumpet. Did you immediately join a band, or did you decide to create your own band?
I did play with one or two different ensembles, but for the most part, I like being a band leader because I prefer playing swing music or rumba. And there are a couple people, you being one of them, which I'm very honored to play with. But for the most part, I pretty much play with my own groups. If I can learn something, like Najib Bahari, I don't know if you remember him, was a Tunisian band leader in Chicago a couple decades ago.
Can you tell us a little bit about him then?
Yes. Najib had a store in Lincoln Square, And he was very instrumental in me meeting most of the musicians that became Rakambu Jazz because they were practicing with his band. And I would practice with their band too because I wanted to learn Tunisian music just as I've already learned some other musics. And he was a darbuka player par excellence and a hajouj, or sinter, a beautiful instrument that's a dark, not quite bass, but darker than an oud sort of tone that the Ganawa musicians play from Tunisia and from Morocco, who are actually sub-Saharan Africans who happen to live there.
I think now I remember him because I think
Yes,
at one moment he was teaching Ryan Dabuka.
yes, he was.
Yeah.
He was
Uh,
he had a ride band.
where is now?
He's in the East Coast. We've talked a couple years ago. I got to get back in touch with him because I'd like to see him now that the record's out. I'd like to go over there and spend a little time in New York, and he lives in New Jersey.
So how long you have been playing as a band leader in Chicago?
I started being a band leader in the early 1980s. So I would say serious, my real serious bands, I'd say 1990. It started with my brother, Frank Youngreth, the other trumpet player you see me with sometime, and myself. And there was a piano player and a drummer. And then bit by bit, it went more towards guitars. And it went away from being just a jazz ensemble to a world music ensemble.
I see.
We changed one or two musicians where you have gigs that are more jazz or blues oriented.
So what was the different venues at that time? Were they different from now?
Well, in the 80s and 90s, they were different. At that point, that was before playing the better places. But by 2000, I was playing at Rhythm and the Hot House a lot. And really, when I found my fiddle, Rakamba was very instrumental in me going a lot further in music because it's my own voice, it's my music, it's not, my arrangements and sometimes increasingly my compositions. Earlier, I was doing mostly, when I play jazz, I mostly play either blues, standards, or swing era jump numbers. And that's great. It's beautiful. I do it very well, but it's not original.
I see.
And creating an environment of playing, Grand Calais music with a jazz horn section or music that bands, it's not exactly the same as Orchestra Baobab or any of those bands, but it's a jazz musician doing those kind of musics and showing my roots also with a lot of the Tunisian Algerian as well.
Based on your experience, I think you have been around for a while. What are the benefits and the challenges you meet along the way when you come to being a band leader?
You have to make sure that your musicians get fed. You know what I mean? You have to make sure that you're not playing jobs in inconsistent places. A lot of I don't like playing for exposure. I play I don't play just for the money, but I want respect. And I prefer playing places where people can hear the music, dance to the music, not necessarily so much drinking. It isn't my thing. If it is that, it's going to be more jazz blues anyways, because those people aren't listening critically to something new.
I see. But
Right? I still do that, but it'd be more in a blues setting because that music fits that environment better.
but can you say challenges you face as a musician trying to have a band together and perform on a regular basis and expect to be paid?
You have to make sure you keep your name out there. You have to do advertising. You have to practice the bands. You know that. You have to have musicians who are going to show up on time. That's crucial. You can have the best musician in town, but if he doesn't show up on time, you're not going to be, your name as a band leader is going to be less. So I try to hire musicians which I know are sober who are direct, and who understand the music. So we rehearse sometimes. In the early days of Rock Combo, we rehearsed every week because we had to. We had to learn the repertoire because I really don't want people reading the music like this because you're never going to play the music, particularly the horn players.
By studying the music scene, often we can make a distinction between two groups. They are the professional musicians, the people you saw on TV who are touring and traveling around the world. But there is also the local band. And local band is quite very limited, and your agency is kind of local. Did
Right.
you find it difficult to be a local band?
I prefer it. I look at it this way. If you're going to be playing around the world, you better have enough of a name where you're getting proper lodging, proper, booking agents to make sure you're getting paid. If you play a place and it's a bum place and it's in your hometown, it's not going to hurt you. You know what I'm saying? Your musicians may not be happy. You may not be happy. You may have to give a check to some people, but you're not stuck. And I've known musicians who've got stuck in another part of the country or another part of the world from a tour that went wrong. So obviously, if you're a major star, if you're Orchestra Baobab or, one of the great stars, you don't have to worry about that. But if you're a second, let's be honest, a second tier band, like a band that doesn't have an international reputation, many times it's better to be in a Chicago or a New York or London or Paris, or whatever is your locale.
I see. As a musician, what are the source? What are the source of your music?
The source of my music, like what makes me play, is the knowledge I have and the love I have of all the various forms of music and fusing that sound, that growl trumpet, like this sound right here. Let's see. And you see, I'm playing very much in what would be a very American, African American style trumpet playing, I was mentored by Jabo Smith even a little bit. And I definitely was mentored by Franz and Paul Bascom. And they all said, use the plunger, but take your music and take it somewhere else. Let the flame go elsewhere. Don't just keep it in what we did. Don't imitate. Do something original. So that's part of my inspiration. Of course, the other inspiration is the rhythms. I like hearing good drums. I like hearing guitars talking, like the two or three guitars playing, or ouds or other instruments like that. A good
So
vocal, inspiration.
when I listen to your music, I have the impression you give the opportunity to your spectator and the people to travel around the world. How that connection come about? Because often you are into swing and jazz, but when I listen to Yves Francois, it look like I'm going to North Africa one way, or sometime I'm traveling into the 60s in Guinea
Yes,
in
yes.
things. So how did you went to those places, or you were a musician who is open, to those influences?
When I was a kid, unlike other kids who listen to regular radio, I listened to shortwave radio. And you may recall, I don't know how, you're younger than me. I don't know how much younger. I'm 62. And in the 1960s and early 70s, you could hear music from Haiti, you could hear music from Congo, you could hear music from Nigeria. And of course, the French, of course, played a lot of music from all parts of Africa and any Francophone country. So I heard this music and it rung in my ears, you know. when my mother spoke of, when I was going to record stores, buying things from all sorts of different countries. And then when you go to France, of course, I was exposed to it there too.
So did you spend time in France?
Yes.
Okay.
And when I was there, I did a lot of what you call crate digging, like looking for records and CDs and 45 RPM records, old records.
Can you share radios in Chicago that were playing that world music when you were growing up?
When I was growing up, it was not Chicago playing that music. I got it from shortwave, and shortwave signals can come from all over the world. I mean, I even remember once listening to an Indian shortwave station. Suddenly they're playing swing era music from America, and I told my father, I said, "How come they're not playing Bollywood?" And he goes, "Music's popular everywhere in the world." So I think there was a station, 93.1 maybe. It was a public station, did play a little world music. But a lot of it came from my going to the record stores and just buying things that I thought, oh, I've heard about Franco. I have to have his records, things like that. And in the 90s and even 80s, there were lots of stores, African stores, where you could buy records. Our friend Paulo Bombe still has a store, and he had a store for decades. And that's where I got one of my first records.
I see. In many ways, music is a tool. What do
Yes.
you use music for as a tool? For you, what music is?
Spread love, to spread a message that we can all enjoy. And life is to enjoy. Life is to feel elevated, but also to feel pleasure. There's nothing wrong with dancing or having how should I say, the dance of life, and the way it makes people feel better about each other. We get to meet people through music and through art.
So why you see that need of sharing love, enjoying?
It's part of my soul. It probably came from my mom. That's all I could say. My mother was an embodiment, as you know, of spreading love to other people. And she was a dancer, and I guess it was just inherited to Mark and I. These are very interesting questions, incidentally.
To love.
Yes.
To love others.
Love, energy, and energy exchange, and sharing knowledge.
Sharing knowledge.
Yes.
So
cultures.
When you are sharing your music, what do you share?
Part of me and a part of my mentors, and the part of what I learned in my life, a language. And I am not good in other languages except a little bit of French. Even there, I'm very halting. But music was a language that took me all over the world. It took me to Turkey. It took me to, all parts of Arabic world, all parts of Africa. It's something about music. Even the Romanite people in Southern Europe, their musics also speak to me. So music's like a language that gets you in their homes, much like cuisine does. Food also teaches. Like some people eat like I eat mostly food from North Africa when I eat, or the Balkans.
I see.
And like a lot of peppery stews and grilled meats and things of that nature.
So can you describe for us a little bit your followers? What are the group? Is it a diverse group? Is it a diverse group? Can you describe a little bit your followers?
My followers, the people who follow me,
yeah, who go to your shows and things.
It's fairly diverse. A lot of Latin Americans.
Okay.
A few Africans. Quite a bit of people who are not exposed to this kind of music normally. And that's why I think that the mixture of all the strong amount of jazz makes the Americans say, what is this? It's something different. because it's not like standard swing era jazz or bebop or anything like that. It's mixes, it makes people dance, and it has a sound, where you're taken to other places in the world. And that was basically what I wanted to do.
I see. Paul, growing up in Chicago, did you have the chance to move from the city and live somewhere else?
A little bit. I mean, I spent a few months in Las Vegas, Nevada. That was interesting.
How
I
was
got
the
I got a lot of respect. It was funny because I never really liked rock music, but going to Las Vegas, there was a pro jam that was there. Like professional musicians after their jobs, they would go to this jam session. They were just as great musicians as the swing musicians I love or the musicians from Orchestra Baobab, just a different language. And so I learned a respect for the music of rock, which I never had before.
I see.
So I think that by going to different ethnic neighborhoods in Chicago, the beautiful thing about Chicago, you can tour the whole world and still be in the city of Chicago.
Yeah, I truly agree about that.
It's why, like, even if you go more than 100, 150 miles away, let's say you go beyond Milwaukee, Wisconsin, because you even have that in Milwaukee a little bit, but beyond Milwaukee, not at all. And the same thing if you go east of, let's say, Grand Rapids, except around Detroit, around Detroit you have that. And I've played in Detroit a few times. And again, same thing with New York. Big cities in this country, you get to see the world, and Chicago's unusually beautiful for that.
I see. Being in the music scene for a long time, do you have the impression that live music is quite slowing down a little bit or is dying?
It hasn't died, but it certainly has slowed down a lot, because when I was, 40 years ago, I could hear bands like Mantuela, who was a Congolese guitarist. I think our friend Simon Kashama played with him, who's incidentally on the CD a couple titles. Mantuela was playing one place, and you could go and see Sonora Matancera because they were still playing even in the 80s and early 90s. You could hear Tito Puente at least 5 to 10 times a year. You could hear local bands playing that music. And I could hear all the famous old jazz musicians that I knew on record still playing, like Jabbo Smith and Franz Jackson. So today, it's not like that. It's not as much live gigs. I'm not going to say there isn't at all, but it's a lot less. And it's a lot more academic when it is. It's a lot of playing in museums and the like, which is good too, but it's a different thing.
I know recently you released a CD again
Yes.
named Viva Rakombu.
Yes.
How was the process of working on that project?
It was very unique. It was done during the pandemic, this album, which Ronnie Malley and George Lawler. George is the drummer, and Ronnie Malley is the oud keyboard and guitarist. I would say he was my right hand on this one and this project. My brother was also very involved, but we couldn't have a band together to record. Some of the tracks were tracks that were recorded in the past, or we would take like a loop of something and build from it. This is not the way I usually record. I usually record, throw 8 mics in front of everyone and just say, okay, let's do a jam. Okay. This was very different, and it's much more produced than I usually do. I think the results are good.
So how you have a CD release? How was the review? How people, what are the input you got from the
It's been positive. It was a soft release. We're going to have a full, like going to send it to radio stations this summer. I just want to wait until the summertime to do that, because there's a lot of gigs going on in August, September. And I think can build a much better momentum at that point, and then try to get gigs all around the Midwest area during the holidays.
So what will be your next coming gig?
Okay, I got a whole bunch in August for nights out in the park. Let's see if I can scare up
with the city of Chicago.
Yes, for the city of Chicago, they have something called Nights Out in the Park. So let me go into my inbox and can read my message. 5 parks between August 9th and the 14th of September. We're going to be touring the various parks in Chicago. Cosme is August 9th. Hiawatha is August 22nd. Donovan is August 23rd.
Can you
Mount
just
Greenwood,
can you
yes.
just share a location? Are they in the south, north?
They're all over the place in town. I can go and give you the locations afterwards, and maybe I can write it down. You can give it to people.
Okay.
Mount Greenwood is September 7th in the 606 Park, which is right at the corner around Wood. I think it's Wood. It's just north of North Avenue. It's going to be in 914 in September 14th. So we'll be playing South Side, North Side, and West Side all.
And all those gigs are organized by you collaborating with the city of Chicago.
With the city of Chicago.
And is free. And
this is all free for people to come. And there'll be like an hour and a half jobs. They're going to start around 6:30, maybe some of the later ones, because it gets into September. It might be starting at 6, because, you know, the night comes earlier in September.
So do you have your trumpet nearby? Because every time we see Mr. Francois, we have the famous hat and the famous trumpet. And if you have it around, can you just share one of your favorite tune before we close our conversation?
So funny you should ask. The trumpet was right next to me.
Because wherever I see Mr. Francois, the trumpet is nearby.
Just a little blues.
Mr. Francois, again, thank you very much for joining me under the Human Rights Tree. I would like to say again, Mr. Francois released a CD. I have it. It is amazing. So you should consider supporting him in his music. And,
yes, we have the abilities. We are in Bandcamp. And you can also go and find me on Facebook. I am out there, and then I've already sold a few CDs that way as well.
So before we close, I will give you the last word. What can you say to young musicians?
Practice.
Practice.
Practice. Don't just practice the music you want to play. Practice the scales. Practice long tones, especially for trumpet players and other horn players, so you have some control on your instrument. Remember, later in life, you can go and have your little bit of fun and everything, but when you're a teenager and you're learning your instrument, this should be your pleasure. After you do your homework, make sure you get A's and B's, everyone. Go and then practice the instrument, because the instrument will love you more than anyone can. It's unbelievable. And you will be able to communicate in a way that you can't communicate with words. For music is a universal language.
Again, Mr. Francois, Yves Francois, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Alphonse. See you very soon.
All right, take care.
Take care. Ciao.
Bye.
Goodbye.